My name is Jane. I am a timid and passive person, but a while ago I had the good fortune to marry a man named James. Unlike me, James seemed confident and assertive, someone I thought would lead the way in our relationship. However, I soon realized that this belief was a major misconception. Growing up, I was always a shy and introverted child. Throughout elementary and middle school, standing out was something I rarely experienced. The friends I had were much like me, reserved and never the center of attention in class. People might be surprised to learn about my mother, given my reserved nature. She's a strong-willed woman known for her leadership in the workplace. Unlike the stereotypical office queen bee, my mom earned her position as a department head through hard work and merit. Though she could be stern with me and the junior staff at work, she was more of a supportive figure, always there to lend an ear and help out. I deeply admire my mother for these qualities. Unfortunately, my father is not part of our lives anymore. When I was little, my mother, unable to cope with my father's gambling habits, decided to divorce him. She discovered that he had been squandering the money she earned, which must have been devastating. During the divorce, her strong personality led her to confront my father assertively. Despite this, she single-handedly raised me afterward. Her strength is what shaped me into who I am today, which might seem odd to some considering how different I am from her. Perhaps her strict upbringing led me to be overly serious. The one thing she always worried about, though, was whether I would find love and get married. My mother once set me up on matchmaking because I did not even show any signs of dating a man. I started working at the company and began dating a man named James, who was introduced to me by a senior colleague. James was different from me. He had a way of speaking his mind clearly and confidently, which I found quite impressive. He reminded me a bit of my mother, Patricia, in his demeanor, and that similarity somehow felt comforting to me. I thought I was doing my best to be devoted to him. When James proposed, we decided to get married, a decision that delighted my mother immensely. I had often talked to my mother about James, and she always encouraged us with words like, "From now on, you two must work together as a team." After our wedding, James took the lead in planning our future together. He was proactive in suggesting where we should live and even the layout of our home. I believed that his opinions were always the best, and I usually went along with his wishes. Thanks to his decisiveness, we settled into a rented house and started our new life together. I must admit, I was a bit over the moon about it all. However, little did I know at that time that my life was about to take a turn in a completely unexpected direction, far from what I had ever imagined. In our new home, life seemed to flow seamlessly, a serendipitous blend of joy and newfound dreams. It was here that I embraced motherhood, carrying a new life within me, a dream I had long cherished. James sparkled with excitement upon hearing the news. His voice, burning with joy, echoed through our home. "This is wonderful. We must celebrate." His reaction, a testament to his deep affection and care, filled my heart with warmth. Yet little did we know, this moment of bliss was a prelude to a series of unexpected events that would transform our ordinary days. One evening, after a long and weary day at work, I returned home only to find a pair of unfamiliar shoes at the entrance. Inside, the air was filled with murmurs of conversation, amongst them James's familiar voice accompanied by another, a voice I recognized all too well. As I cautiously approached the living room, my heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and dread, I was greeted by none other than James's mother, Carol. She welcomed me with a smile. "Welcome back, Jane. Sorry for intruding like this." I stood there momentarily lost for words, surprised by her unannounced visit. Recovering, I managed to ask, "Mom, what brings you here? Is there something you need?" She looked at me intently, a gentle smile playing on her lips. "Jane, I've heard the news. You're finally going to be a mother." I immediately noticed something was off when I saw the bottle of alcohol placed on the table. It was clear that Carol, My mother-in-law had already had quite a bit to drink. Her words were starting to slur, a sign of her inebriation. I asked her, trying to hide my perplexity, "I see, but why are you drinking here?" To this, my husband James responded with a cheerful grin. "Surprised, aren't you?" Actually, Mom wanted to throw a surprise celebration. Remember I mentioned we should have a party soon. His words brought mixed feelings. Of course, I appreciated Carol wanting to celebrate, but I wish they had planned things more thoroughly. Instead of a sudden surprise, I would have preferred to know in advance about her visit. Moreover, our unborn child hadn't reached a stable phase yet, making it feel premature to celebrate. Despite this, James and Carol were in high spirits, almost as if they were at a festival. Then Carol, with a sudden shift to seriousness, looked at me and said, "So, Jane, you'll have to be on top of the household chores. I'll be here to train you properly." I couldn't help but feel a bit irritated. I had already learned all about household management from my mother, Patricia, and since marrying James, I had been handling almost all of our domestic responsibilities. Being lectured by Carol in such a manner was slightly annoying. Trying to brush off the incident as just my mother-in-law being tipsy, I decided to ignore her comments for the time being. Yet, this was merely the beginning. She started visiting my home more frequently, scrutinizing every nook and cranny. One evening, after a long day at work, I was greeted by her criticism about a single strand of hair on the living room floor. "Blended," she remarked, "there's a hair on the floor. You really should be more careful with your cleaning." I was perplexed by her remark, staring at the spot for a while. Yet the dust was hardly noticeable. Still, my mother-in-law continued, "And look at the corner of the bookshelf. There's a bit of dust there, too. You must clean thoroughly." I was internally baffled by her nitpicking, but outwardly responded, "Is that so?" I didn't notice it myself. However, my response seemed to ignite a fire in her. She suddenly burst out in anger. "You can't take cleaning so lightly. Think about the child that's coming. What if they inhale the dust? Have you thought about the illness they might get because of it?" Her voice was so loud that it could have easily carried outside through the open window. To calm her down, I could only apologize. "I'm sorry, I'll be more mindful from now on." As my husband, James, was due to return home, she finally calmed down and left our house. I was profoundly shaken by the words my mother-in-law had said to me that day. When my husband, James, returned home, I hesitantly approached him, my mind fraught with deep concerns. "Hey, James, Carol was here earlier, and I was wondering, is she a bit of a perfectionist? She seems very meticulous and perhaps a bit too focused on minor details?" I asked him, my voice tinged with uncertainty. To my surprise, James offered an unexpected response. "I don't think so. I see Carol as more easygoing, not the type to fuss over little things." Did something happen? His words were in stark contrast to what I had experienced, leaving me slightly bewildered. "Well, it's just that she pointed out some small things to me, and I felt a bit, criticized," I replied, trying to convey my feelings subtly. However, James seemed unconvinced. "I don't think that's the case, Jane. Maybe you're just overthinking it a bit." He was reluctant to accept my perspective. James grew up without a father, similar to me. His parents divorced when he was just a child. I understand why he holds Carol in such high regard, but I wished he would empathize with my feelings a bit more. That day my spirits were dampened, but I knew I couldn't allow myself to wallow in self-pity like my mother, Patria, whom I deeply admire. I reminded myself that I needed to be strong. After all, I was going to be a mother soon. Dwelling on these feelings wouldn't benefit my future child. However, despite my attempts to reassure myself, Carol's harsh treatment towards me didn't cease, gradually wearing down my spirit. Carol, my mother-in-law, always has something to complain about. Whenever she visited our home, she often started by critiquing the yard, remarking in a loud, clear voice, "Look at this overgrown grass again." leaving the garden in such a mess. Our neighbors will surely laugh at us." Each time she came over, she pointed out our lack of gardening, causing me distress. Then she continued her tirade. "Why are the laundry still out when it's cloudy? It defeats the purpose of washing, doesn't it?" She loudly complained about my housework. What's more, Carol only made these remarks when my husband, James, was away at work. It seems she wanted to maintain the image of a perfect mother in front of her son, only revealing her true feelings when he's not around. And as if on cue, she always hurried back to her house before James returned. This repetitive situation left me increasingly troubled by her behavior. Even when I expressed these concerns to James, he didn't believe me. He'd often retorted, "Come on, my mom would never do something like that. Do you have something against her, Jane?" James dismissed my complaints as mere grievances, showing little understanding of my feelings. The ongoing issues with Carol had been so stressful that I had been feeling on the verge of a breakdown. My colleagues at work were also concerned about my recent lack of energy. They advised, "You've been looking a bit off these days. Don't push yourself too hard." However, in reality, no one truly understood what I was going through. Feeling cornered and overwhelmed, I instinctively reached for my smartphone and pushed a number, almost without thinking. The person on the other end was my mother, Patricia. You might think I should have turned to my mother from the beginning, but she's a very strict woman, and I feared she might dismiss my concerns. I worried she would brush off my troubles with a stern, "Don't fuss over such things." But as my emotional limit was fast approaching, I finally decided to reach out to her. Tears streaming down my face, I poured out my heart to her, bracing myself for a scolding. However, my mother unexpectedly understood. She said gently, "I see. Your child is due in a couple of months, right? Come home right away." Her reaction was unexpected, but I realized I had no choice but to return to her house. I immediately began preparing to go back home, and the next morning informed James of my decision to go back for the birth. However, James seemed slightly upset and retorted in a somewhat raised voice, "What? You're going back home just for that? Can't you just go to the hospital when it's time? And isn't it too early to leave? What about all the housework here?" Despite being told so, I just couldn't bear the thought of staying there any longer. With a heart full of defiance and dissatisfaction, I retorted with all my emotions, "It's getting too hard to even move, so I've decided to stay with my mom." My words were laced with a bit of impetuosity as I forcefully left the house, heading towards the bus stop. The weight of family conflicts bore heavily on my shoulders. However, from behind he shouted, "As soon as you give birth, come back immediately. Got it? I'll leave a ton of housework for you. Don't you forget you're a wife." Despite his loudness, I didn't look back, continuing my departure. Each step was laden with the inescapable bonds of family and my earnest desire for a new life. Upon arriving at my parents' home, my mother, Patricia, welcomed me with open arms. I immediately clung to her like a child, crying my heart out. Gently embracing me, she said with love and understanding, "You've been through a lot, haven't you? First, take some time to rest. Remember, it's not just your body anymore." We then moved to the living room together. I couldn't help but spill out to her, "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm still weak, causing you trouble again." To which she replied, "What are you talking about? You're not weak. What mother would abandon her daughter in distress? It's okay, but we do need to have a little talk with that family. I'm not satisfied yet." At that moment, I realized I had finally found a truly peaceful place, and all my tension melted away. Several months had passed, and James and his mother-in-law, Carol, were about to face an unexpected and significant punishment. I returned to her parental home safely, gave birth to her child after 2 months. In my heart, I wondered if I would have ever met this little miracle had I stayed in that house. Patricia and I joyfully celebrated the new life, deciding to stay at her home for a while, much to her strong desire. About a week later, as the night deepened and the baby fell into a peaceful sleep, we were having a leisurely conversation over tea. It was then that an unexpected call from James came. I shuddered involuntarily, but my mom calmly said, "I'll take it. You don't say a word." She took my smartphone and answered the call. The voices of Patricia and James leaking through the phone reached my ears. "Hey, how long are you going to stay at your parents' house? Come back home soon. The baby must be born by now, right? Hurry up and bring my kid to see me. My mom is at her wits' end, too," James blurted out forcefully. He was under the impression that Jane had answered the call and didn't hold back his harsh words. However, Patricia listened calmly and murmured softly, "I see, so this is how it is." Next, Patricia quietly introduced herself. "Are you James?" "I am Jane, mother, Patricia." James, caught off guard, stammered, "Oh, it's you, mother-in-law? How's Jane? Please let her talk," unaware that he was practically snapping at Patricia. Hearing this, Patricia seemed to have an epiphany and was about to say something unbelievable. "Actually, I'm in the middle of my daughter and granddaughter's funeral. I wish I could be somewhere else, but that's just not possible." Hearing this, I was so surprised that I was at a loss for words. In my heart, I involuntarily screamed, "What, really?" James, too, seemed visibly shocked, his expression one of confusion as he stammered, "What? What do you mean? Jane and her child's funeral? Is that really happening?" His earlier confidence had vanished, replaced by a sudden sense of panic. But Patricia continued speaking calmly, "Yes, it's true. Jane was constantly harassed by your mother, Carol, suffering immense stress every day. And when Jane reached out for help, you just ignored her, even going so far as to blame her. Jane couldn't take it anymore, and ultimately, she and her unborn child." Patricia's voice wavered as if she was holding back tears. James still couldn't believe it, murmuring, "No, my mother couldn't have done something like that. It must be some mistake, right? That can't be." He sounded as if he was desperately hoping it was a lie, more unwilling to believe it than actually disbelieving it. Yet Patricia went on with her story. "I actually went to your house the other day, but no one was there. As I was about to leave, Emily, a neighbor, approached me and asked if I was related to the family living there. As I listened to my mother, I was taken aback, realizing such things had actually happened. When stopped by a neighbor, my mother seemed to answer honestly, 'I am the biological mother of the wife of this house.' The neighbors, showing concern, began to express their worries. 'That's quite troubling. Is your daughter all right? It seems she's been enduring some harsh treatment every day.' They revealed that they had overheard the harsh scoldings from the mother-in-law and the angry outbursts from the husband, James, especially when the daughter returned to her parental home. Even when the windows were open, these incidents occurred frequently enough for the neighbors to take notice. The neighbors were deeply concerned about the family's well-being and had secretly recorded the mother-in-law's abusive behavior and the household's atmosphere on their smartphones. They were contemplating contacting the local authorities for advice, which meant that there was evidence of the mother-in-law's misconduct. Patricia explained all these details to James, concluding her account with a stern remark, "This is utterly unacceptable." After hearing everything, James was so overwhelmed that he found himself unable to speak. "So that's why the neighbors have been giving me cold looks lately. Was what Jane said actually true?" He muttered in a mix of shock and confusion. After a brief pause, James managed to voice his thoughts. However, Patricia, undeterred, stated, "I'll be visiting your house in a few days. Please make sure your mother, Carol, is there as well." Then she came to me to confirm the plan. "Do you really want James to stay and be the father of that child?" I, holding back a mix of emotions, sighed deeply and replied with determination, "No, I no longer want to have anything to do with that father and son. I will raise this child on my own." Patricia smiled warmly, reassuring me, "Understood. Don't worry, I'll be here to help with the upbringing too." A few days later, Patricia actually went to James's house, bringing along her friend Matthew, posing as a lawyer. She confidently told James and his family, "I've brought a lawyer with me." The truth was that Matthew was just an ordinary businessman. This deception was meant to unsettle James and his family. Patricia's real intention was revealed when she presented a divorce paper, saying, "Please sign this quickly." The paper bore Jane's name. In his haste, he quickly signed the divorce papers, not realizing their impact. They must have felt it unwise to resist. After achieving her goal, Patricia decided to leave promptly. She left them with a foreboding message: "We will prepare for what's to come, so brace yourselves." Even Matthew, impersonating a lawyer, added, "With the evidence we have, it seems we can take this case quite far." Until the end, James and Carol kept bowing their heads, repeatedly pleading, "We are truly sorry. Please let's handle this amicably." Patricia returned home with a defiant smile, radiating dignity and self-assurance. Choosing to ignore everything, when I asked her about it later at home, she gracefully smiled and calmly responded to my question. "But really, are you planning to do something to James and his family now?" With a gentle laugh, she replied in a composed voice, "No, I won't do anything. After all, Jane and my grandchild are safe. However, it's only fair that Jane's pain is felt by them too. An eye for an eye, that's my policy. If they, as a family, did what they did, then it's only natural for me to step in." Her strong will and bravery always inspire me. Thanks to her, I felt emotionally supported and saved. Since then, James and his mother-in-law, Carol, have been tormented by intense guilt, struggling with their daily lives. The cold stares from those around them have made their environment increasingly uncomfortable. The neighbors still look at them with chilly detachment, ensuring their days are filled with discomfort and fear. They live in constant anxiety, unsure of what might happen next. However, eventually my mother, being the conscientious person she is, decided that continuing the lie wasn't right. When James called to apologize, she finally answered on the phone. She firmly stated, "Even so, the fact remains that Jane was emotionally harmed because of you. It wouldn't be strange to demand compensation for that. Remember, I hold the evidence, so don't forget it." Her words were not just filled with anger towards them, but also conveyed deep love and concern for me. I still cherish the days spent with my mother and child, the three of us together, living joyfully day by day. Watching over the growth of my kid has become my greatest joy and purpose in life. My mother and I often observe and discuss the developmental milestones of our kid, finding delight in every little change. One day I curiously asked my mom, "Do you think our little one resembles more of me or you?" With a gentle smile, my mother replied, "Well, it seems like a perfect blend of both of us, a balanced mix that's just right." Her words brought a spontaneous smile to my face, and we both shared a moment of pure happiness. Such is the nature of our everyday life, seemingly ordinary yet filled with happiness and contentment. In the small talks with my family and in the simple moments of daily life, I find profound joy and satisfaction. The little interactions, the shared smiles, and the warm feelings of being together make each day worthwhile.